I'm Lauren O'Neill from Q101. We have a very special event coming up this Monday, June 3rd, that I would love for you to join us for. A very special afternoon with Brent Smith of Shinedown. We're teaming up with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to really capitalize on the conclusion of May being Mental Health Awareness Month. And a performance will be involved, also a panel with some very esteemed guests, one of them joining me right now. He's a Grammy Award-winning artist, the founding drummer of Maroon 5, registered associate marriage and family therapist, life coach, advocate, and author of Harder to Breathe, a memoir making Maroon 5 and finding recovery. I hope I didn't miss anything. It's Ryan Dusick.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, did I leave anything out?
If you left anything out, it's probably not that important. So, but
Okay.
thank you.
Well, I can imagine this time of year is pretty busy for you. What have you been up to lately?
Oh, wow. I've been well, I'm working as a therapist now, so I have my clients on a daily and weekly basis and but I, been promoting this book and kind of becoming an advocate, a mental health advocate, stepping out and doing some speaking, and that's been really rewarding as an adjunct to all of the work that I've been doing clinically. And then now I'm starting a podcast as well called the Harder to Breathe podcast. So kind of taking all of that into action and having more conversations about mental health.
It's so important what you're doing, and you're so great at it. And I'd like to read a line from the book to kind of encapsulate maybe where you are now. His life has been a long and winding road from aspiring pop star with anxiety to heartbroken alcoholic to thriving mental health survivor and messenger of hope in recovery. And when you're talking about your struggles personally with anxiety, you trace them back to when you were a teenager?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting looking back with 2020 hindsight. I don't think I really had the vocabulary for what I was experiencing when I was a teenager. Of course, you have to remember this is like 30 years ago now. The public discourse about mental health was not what it's becoming now. Not that we're completely where we need to be. However, at that time, just struggling with some of the things that I didn't really have any real knowledge or understanding of what I was experiencing or that other people were experiencing it too. My only connection at that time were my heroes in rock and roll. I looked to Kurt Cobain and Chris Cornell and Eddie Vedder. This was, in the early 90s and the grunge rock era. Those were my heroes. And I saw these very powerful, but very wounded and sort of self-reflective warriors of depression and anxiety and some of the things that I was experiencing but didn't have a vocabulary for.
Mm.
So that was the only place that I really felt seen and understood. At my school, I went to this sort of uh, preppy school where everything was a little bit superficial to me, and I didn't feel like I really fit in there for that reason. So
Mm.
I kind of like walked around campus carrying this feeling of anxiety that I didn't really understand and didn't know that other people might be experiencing it too.
I think that's so common with those of us who struggle with anxiety, especially at the onset. What's happening to me? Especially if you don't have that background, that vocabulary, the education on what it is, and that you're not alone. It can be very scary. I mean, I remember my first panic attack. I thought I was dying. I thought I was having a heart attack. And as a 20-year-old, it's like, this can't be real. This can't be happening to me. What is it? Do you remember, is there one specific instance that stuck out to you that you realized this is a problem?
Yeah, it was subtle at first. It became more of a problem for me when my life became more intense and there was more external pressure that was meeting up with the internal pressure. I was somebody who put a lot of pressure on myself, very perfectionistic, um, kind of demanded excellence in everything that I did. And up to a certain point in my life, it came relatively easily for me to be, high achieving and that sort of thing. But as a teenager, all of a sudden it was becoming more challenging. And my sort of self identity of being this high achiever was really challenged. And so I was carrying just this intensity inside of me and kind of questioning everything. And I remember the first time that I had a very tangible physical experience of anxiety and it was walking around campus in high school and feeling this sort of lump in my throat.
Mm,
that was getting more and more intense, and almost to the point where I felt like if this gets worse, I'm not going to be able to breathe. And I was like hyperventilating, trying to get enough breath, which was making me lightheaded, and then just sort of feeling like I was really disconnected from my surroundings, which now I understand as dissociation, of course. So it was a combination of some physical symptoms and the ruminating thoughts, and then just feeling, kind of beating myself up inside because I was like, why is life becoming so difficult all of a sudden? I used to
mm.
be a carefree child, and now everything I do seems more challenging, and the things that I, kind of really cared about were becoming more difficult. So that was when it kind of came to a head. And I think the first time that it caused a problem for me was um, in sports. I was an athlete growing up before I was a musician, and I was a pitcher. I was a really good pitcher as a kid, and pitching in high school, all of a sudden I started having some problems. First, it was some arm injuries. No one likes to go through that. However, in trying to recover from that, I was putting extra pressure on myself and feeling the first time that sort of external pressure meeting up with the internal pressure I put on myself. And then I sort of developed like mental blocks, like not being able to do things the way that I used to, that should have been or were simple and easy for me at a certain point, all of a sudden became more challenging. So it was this performance anxiety and sort of my body not responding in the way that I was used to it responding.
Crazy. Was there a defining moment where you said, okay, enough, it's time to get some help?
I wish at that point that that had been the case. Looking back, my parents tried to help as much as they could. I was one of those teenage boys who was kind of brooding, very much emulating my heroes that I mentioned earlier, and
Mm.
very closed down. And my parents were very loving, but I was kind of like going into my bedroom and closing the door at night and not really talking to them. So they were wondering what was going on. I was burning incense and they thought I was smoking pot. And so they actually sent me to a therapist on a couple occasions, and at that point in my life and at that point in history, I was very proud and defensive, and I just kind of sat there silently and defiantly and didn't really open up or share. I didn't really have any self awareness at that point. I didn't have the insight to understand what was going on for me,
Mm.
and I also was kind of questioning authority and all that stuff, that all that great teenage angst,
Mm.
So it wasn't until a long, way too long later, that I realized that asking for help is not only not a bad thing, but
Mm.
actually it takes real courage to do that. All the sort of teenage defensiveness that I had, the things that got in the way of asking for help, that was just youthful immaturity. I realized that actually being brave, actually being courageous, means getting more comfortable with your vulnerability
Yeah.
and stepping into that space and realizing that's where the real growth is. That's where you can heal, that's where you can find some solutions to the things that are challenging you. And until you realize and admit that you're feeling vulnerable in those ways, it's kind of difficult to walk through that.
And it's one thing to muster up that courage to ask for help. It's a completely different thing to want to help others. How did you get to that place?
Well, that came later in life for me. I being a musician, I felt a real strong identity and purpose, artistically, creatively, uh, and just feeling like what we were doing was we were providing entertainment and connection by way of the music that we were creating. And being in the middle of that, I didn't really think of myself too far beyond that. That was my identity and purpose was very much wrapped up in that because it became all consuming, um, in a good way at the time. But after I had to walk away from the band because of all the problems that I had, I really had to reckon with my identity and
Mm.
who I am at my core. Am I that? Am I only that? Am I just the drummer in Maroon 5? Or is there more to me? And at first, I couldn't see it because I was just struggling with the grief of that loss. But in time, when I found recovery from not just alcoholism, but all of the mental health challenges I was facing, um, that's when I realized that I had other purpose in this life. And that purpose was not just that one thing that happened to be handed to me at one point in my life, through hard work, but also just through a lot of good fortune. Um, Purpose was something that I could create and that I could recreate. And being in recovery, being somebody who was, working um, first as a volunteer, uh, volunteering at a recovery center, that became something that I really started to identify as a purpose for me, and being of service felt really fulfilling. So that kind of led to me deciding maybe this is something I want to do more centrally to my career and my purpose. And that's when I went back to school to become a therapist. And each step of the way since then has just been a sort of natural outgrowth of that, just following that feeling of service and purpose. And that led me to more advocacy and writing the book, and everything that I'm doing now.
And we are so lucky for that, that you're able to get to the place that you are now in life and being so helpful and of service to others. So, like you said, for someone realizing that they need help, that first step can seem insurmountable. Do you have advice for a person who's watching right now that may be at that place right now?
Yeah, well, I certainly can understand why it's so challenging. It's for me being on the other side of it, of course, it's easy to say, "Oh, just ask for help."
Yeah.
You know, as advocates, we stand up on stage or get on the radio and say that, and it seems so simple when you're on the other side of it, but it really is a challenge because there's so many things that might be blocking that from happening. On the very basic individual level, there's that defensiveness.
Mhm.
There's that sort of, you don't want to admit that you need help. You don't want to admit that you're struggling. But then there are other things systemically, culturally. There's stigma attached to asking for help and reaching out. You don't want to associate yourself with having a mental health diagnosis or needing therapy or that sort of thing. So, getting past all of that and actually asking for help is a process, and it's not something that you can just do in an instant. But it starts with, before even being comfortable with vulnerability, I think it starts with self-compassion. Being able to look inward, and instead of having that judgment, that initial judgment, which is, oh, I'm feeling that, that's bad, or that's scary, therefore I'm going to push it away, or criticizing that feeling of vulnerability in some way. Just pausing for a minute and getting curious about what that feeling is and what it's trying to tell you. Like, why does that exist exactly? What part of me is blocking that? What part of me feels scared or vulnerable in that moment? You don't even need to admit that to anyone else at that stage of it. It's just looking inward and allowing yourself the kind of compassion that you would somebody else if they came to you and told you they were struggling,
Yeah.
right?
It's so important to remove the stigma. And that's why these events that you're doing, where you're speaking, sharing, helping to seize the awkward and have people take that first step, is so crucial, because mental health is health. So we're very excited to have you coming to Chicago very soon. How did you first meet Brent Smith of Shinedown?
Yeah, Brent is great. I met Brent, I think probably about 3, 4 months ago, something like that now. We were doing, actually, I was gonna do an event for a advocacy group here in LA called Hollywood in Mind, um, which was designed, I think, to destigmatize the mental health conversation in the entertainment industry. Um, and they asked me to come and interview, I think it was going to be another artist originally, a hip hop artist. Um, and I was like, of course, I'll do this. And then at the last minute, that artist dropped out, and they said, okay, bad news. That artist can't do it. I was like, oh no. But instead, we have Brent Smith, the lead singer of Shinedown. And so I was like, oh, okay. Well, not only is that huge, he's a big
Mhm.
star, it's a big band, but I think we're going to have a lot in common. And that turned out to be true because he's really walking the walk and talking the talk of advocacy himself. They've made it a mission as a part of what they do as a band to talk about these things, even in their lyrics. And so when we got to talking and prepping for that event, we realized, okay, this was going to work well, and it did. And so right afterwards, we were just like, well, if anything else comes up, let's do something else again.
Well, he handpicked you to join us on Monday, so we're very thrilled for that. He is just one of the real ones in the industry. And like, you meet a lot of musicians, a lot of people related in the industry, and it can be very vapid and very surface. And there are some very special people, yourself included, that are deeper and realize that what he has is a gift. And that he has the platform that he does is another gift. So to use the platform to spread messages, I love, he's been so positive and really encouraging people to take control of their physical health and get the exercise, because that in hand goes with mental health. So you did mention you have a podcast coming, the Harder to Breathe podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you for asking. I'm really excited about it. This is something I've been thinking about doing for probably like a year, and I'm finally in the process. It's probably going to launch in mid-June, so just a few weeks from now. Um, and we've already shot, I think, 7 or 8 episodes. We have more. I'm all scheduled up, all booked up for the next like 2 months. Uh, we have some amazing guests. Basically, the premise is a mental health themed show, but it's going to be entertaining as well. We're going to have conversations that are going to be informative and enlightening, but also engaging and, dare I say, even funny at times. So it's going to be a nice cross section of a clinician talking about mental health in a serious way, but also just talking with real people, in particular top performers, people who are under the kind of pressure that I was under. Those people that rise to the top of their industry, whether they be entertainers or athletes or CEOs, they usually get to that place because they have a lot of drive and they put a lot of pressure on themselves, and then they're in a position of great responsibility and external pressure. So those are interesting conversations to have in terms of how do you take care of your mental health when you're in that position, and
Mhm.
how does that apply to the rest of us who all experience those things on some level and can relate in that way.
I know you've been kind of keeping your guest list under wraps. Can you give us any hints or any insight to who might be joining you on this podcast?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting group of people. I think one person I can definitely mention as of now is Benj Gershman of the band OAR. We just did an episode with him. He has a podcast coming out that I just did, so we kind of did the swap thing where I did his and he did mine. We have a one of our first few episodes. We have a content creator who has like millions of followers. I don't want to give away who that is yet, but that's going to be a pretty big one. I'm working on a few of my other musician friends from my career. Anyone who knows my background and some of the people that I used to run with might have some ideas of some of those people that might show up on the show, including some people we may have talked about in this conversation.
Okay.
However, as you know, the bigger the star, the harder it is to get them on the actual
Mhm.
calendar on a day. So some of it is still just scheduling, but we have gotten some of these people to agree to schedule. So it's going to be exciting.
Okay, well, if that's a thing where you're owed a favor because you've guested on other podcasts, I feel like you've got a ton of favors in the pipeline, because it seems like you're a pretty regular special guest to have come on to other people's podcasts.
Yeah, I've been out there. I've probably done over 50 podcasts in the last year, maybe 100. I don't even know. It's been a quite an adventure. I didn't plan this. It was just like you write a book, you put it out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I have a platform,
Yep.
and what am I going to do with that platform? And so it's an opportunity, as you were describing with Brent. It's an opportunity to really just contribute to the conversation. So that's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to do.
Love that. So, final question. If you have a toolbox that's support for your own mental health, what 5 tools are in that box?
Well, for me, one of the starting points was having some structure in my life. For for musicians and artists, that can be really challenging. And I always thought of myself as somebody who didn't have a normal clock. I
Mm-hmm.
was just I was a night owl. I did my best work after the sun went down. Um, and just all of the kind of disarray and chaos that goes with that lifestyle. It wasn't until I was in recovery. You're in rehab. They make you get up at 6 in the morning every morning, and after a month of that, you get with the program and you realize, oh yeah, getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep and going to sleep at the same time every night and sleeping with the nighttime hours actually does have an effect in terms of how I feel and how I function. So, look, within reason, I know not everyone's lifestyle necessarily fits with that, but creating some consistency and structure to your day in a way that your body can get into a rhythm, that's been important for me. Uh, the second thing would be building self-care into that routine. We talk about self-care as being sort of this treat that you do for yourself every now and then. It's like, well, I'm gonna get a facial, I'm gonna go to the spa, and that's self-care. For me, self-care is a daily routine, and it's really about the things that I need to be at my best, because I'm not going to be my best for the other people I need to show up for if I'm not taking care of myself first. So again, that's sleep, that's diet, that's, consistent exercise. And then it's also just making sure that, as driven as I am and as much as I want to accomplish all these things, that I'm taking time to relax and rest, to connect with the people in my life that are important to me. Self-care is holistic. It's relational as well as it is physical and psychological. We need those connections in life. We need those things that fill us up. And so another thing I'd say, number three, is, getting in touch with my and staying in touch with my inner child. Things can get real serious when you're a therapist having heavy conversations every day. And then in my free time, getting on podcasts and talking about it more, going to the ball field on the weekend and going and playing softball. Baseball was my first love. That's my inner child's space to kind of run around, be silly and competitive, but allow that 12-year-old part of me to come out. That's a really important part of my self-care, is to make sure that I'm maintaining a connection with that part of me. Another one is, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the self-compassion piece. Um, so much of what was a challenge for me and why I carried so much anxiety was that perfectionism, was the pressure that I put on myself. And so, whenever I go to that place of self-judgment, or putting a lot of expectations on myself that might be unrealistic, reminding myself to take a step back and have compassion for myself, to realize that we often talk to ourselves, in ways that we would never talk to somebody else that we cared about deeply. And so if we care about ourselves, in that way, then we should talk to ourselves in the ways that we would someone we love. And so just recognizing, basically, if I judge myself, if I criticize myself, that's not actually going to facilitate growing and improving. It's just going to keep me in the place that I'm at, and if anything, make me feel lesser. But having that compassion, being my own cheerleader, having self-empathy, those are the things that will allow me to kind of deal with the things that are challenging and grow through them. Um, and I guess the last one I would say is an outgrowth of that, which is, something I talk a lot about, is just curiosity. The curiosity can be both for self and for others. Um, Part of that self-judgment, that whole thing, that self-judgment, that inner critic, it kind of cuts off that curiosity right at the pass before we can even get to know what's going on within ourselves or within other people. We've sort of ended that process by jumping to self-judgment. And I think a lot of people, meaning well, even in the self-help industry, will tell you, well, you just got to change your mindset. You got to be more determined. You got to, just do it. That just do it kind of mindset. It's like that can drive you to accomplish, great things. It can get you out there and moving, but it doesn't address the things that were challenging you in the first place.
Mm.
Why am I having this self-judgment? Why am I, in this place where it's difficult for me to find motivation and to enact change? So that first step of curiosity, looking inward with curiosity, there's parts of me that exist that are trying to help me. They may
Mm.
be self-defeating, but at some point they were helpful to me, either as a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism. And so figuring out where those things come from, um, looking inward and really getting some answers and some self-awareness before taking steps of action or change. That's
Mm.
where you actually start to, have some understanding of what it is you actually need to address. And then having that same attitude of curiosity, with the other people in your life and the things that you walk into. It's just such a blessing to, at this point in my life, be able to walk into spaces and admit I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. There's so much for me to learn from every person that I meet, from every situation that I'm in. So having that curiosity and that humility to recognize there is something to learn, and being open to that process. So being open to the possibilities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. We cannot wait to have you here in our panel discussion on mental health. with Ryan Dusick. Brent Smith of Shinedown teamed up with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. If you weren't lucky enough to get into the room with us, you can stream it live from the Q101 and Shinedown Facebook pages starting at 3 p.m. Central Time. And then we will post it up later on YouTube as well. But I invite you to join us. It's going to be amazing. Harder to Breathe, the memoir out now, the podcast to come soon, wherever you find your podcasts.
Yeah, we're figuring that out as we speak.
Okay. RyanDusick.com for all the info. Ryan, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your heart and your knowledge. And it is just absolutely invaluable.
Thank you, Lauren, for this opportunity. This has been great. Thank you.
We appreciate you, and we will see you on Monday.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.